Oh, here I am on another Friday, another ZDTV. All ready. I was ready, Ken, to start this all by myself. And then who comes in right at the last minute,
Swooping in.
right when I was about to hit start stream? Ken comes to join the party.
Yeah, I'm running a little late. Sorry about that.
Hey, Ken,
Howdy.
how are things this week?
Things are good. Clint, how about yourself?
That's good. Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited for today's ZDTV
I can
myself.
hear it in your voice.
I am. I am. I sit here and work on the OpenZD project all the time, all day long. I make services, I make doc, I make little guides and whatnot, and I do all kinds of stuff. And what I normally don't do, I do this all stuff for fun, right? Like learning for learning and trying to help other learners. And I don't oftentimes take a moment and really knuckle down and figure out how I would do some sort of service in production. But these questions do come up a fair amount because with a OpenZD overlay network, one of the questions I first had is how does a load balancer work? How will redundancy work, right?
Yeah, that's when it
So
gets real. Rubber
yeah,
meets
that's
the
when it
road.
gets
So then you're not, okay, this is amazing stuff, but how am I actually going to operate this at scale?
exactly. Or just for reliability. Because like who here is pushing a million packets a second, right? Like very, very, very few people are at that kind of crazy scale. But you do want reliability. So I'm really excited because I don't have my power plug. Hang on,
Yeah,
hang
it
on.
doesn't matter until it does
That's right. But I also forgot one
on the reliability side.
very important thing here, which is I forgot to put my little slide up. I even upgraded the date this time.
Way to go, Clint.
Last time I screwed up, and I think we've been at like March 24th for 3 weeks now. So here's our changes. We
Nice.
always go through the release notes, and then we're going to talk about HA services, and then we're going to just talk about more HA services. And we're going to do that with this fella, Paul Lorenz, and I'm going to bring him onto our stage here. Hi, Paul. How are you?
Good. How's everybody?
I'm excited, as you can tell.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so Paul is an engineer on the OpenZD project, spends most of his time working on the fabric, but he's been all over the place. And today I have asked him to come on and talk to us about high available services. So Paul he was just chomping at the bit when I asked him. He was like, "Oh yeah, totally. I'm going to come and be there. It sounds like the highlight of my day." So thank you, Paul, for showing up. I have no idea what Paul is going to show. This is live TV at its finest. So, Paul, anything you want to say before you start?
No, I don't think so. We can jump right in, I think.
All right. Well, then let me share my screen through your screen because that's how Zoom wants to do it nowadays. So we'll bring this up, and I'll turn off me.
Oh, I think. Can you guys still hear me?
Oh, did I turn myself off?
Yes.
Oh, I need to
So, Paul,
see.
let's just mute
How
our
silly.
video and we can let
I got to,
people.
I'm still new at this, Paul. I've got to turn my camera off like that. And now you can still hear me, but you're the only one that people can see for the moment.
I just felt real lonely for a minute there.
Well, we can't have that, Paul. All right.
Yeah.
So the stage will be yours. And then what I'll do is I'll maximize your screen like this, and then you'll be off camera. But go ahead and set us up. And then when you're ready, when you want to start typing, I'll make the screen bigger.
Okay. So just set things up. This is going to cover like a lot of just service hosting in general. So kind of starting from the very basics and then working our way up to more and more complicated and different scenarios, focusing on different needs. So to do that, we're going to use just a very simple server and client. So on the server side, we're just going to have basically like the NCAT echo server, right? It's going to take traffic in and spit that traffic back out again.
And how did you set up the server? Did you follow a quick start, or are you just running it yourself?
So which are you talking about,
the overlay network itself, the whole overlay?
Okay, so for that, I just I'm kind of running a developer setup. So I
So you've got it all set up for you, and you know how to start it and stop it and whatnot.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I've got a controller running, and I'm going to start off with one edge router, and then I'll be adding more edge routers or another edge router to show how we do work with multiple for hosting purposes.
So you're going to actually start with one edge router and then add two, or add one more to have two total?
Yep.
Well, that's exciting.
So our server side is going to be basically an echo server, kind of like NCAT style, and then the client side is also sort of NCAT style. Whatever you put into it, it will feed through, and then it'll show you what it gets back. So
is that one of our samples that you're running, or is that?
So what I did is I took we have some sample servers that do basically this, and I took those and I kind of rolled them into ZD under a new demo area here. So we've got the CD demo area where you can run the echo server.
Can you just do me one favor and make that just a tiny bit bigger?
Let's see. How's that?
Yeah, I think that'll be better.
So this version of the echo server has some options where you can tell it, I want to run in a non-ZD mode where I just listen on a port for TCP traffic, or it can listen as a SDK, as ZD SDK embedded server, where you tell it, I want to host this service, and it will use ZD to host the service, or you can do both at the same time if you want to.
And is this pushed to a repository, or did you make it?
It's in a branch off of the ZD repo right now, and so this will hopefully be in the next release.
Cool.
So the other thing is this. We've got now also the Zcat, which is sort of the client side of this, which lets you do the same thing, right? You can either just talk over a plain network or over an underlay network directly to the server, or you can talk to a ZD service directly. And I'm just going to show kind of how this.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
Is that kind of like an NCAT, like a?
Yeah, this is basically exactly like NCAT. This does all the. It's just basically copying traffic in and out, right?
Gotcha.
So kind of to show this running, I'm gonna start up the. I got a couple. We're gonna start off with one server. We're gonna end up with two servers and two edge routers. But we're gonna start off with just the one. So I'm gonna have the echo server running here, and we want to pick a port to run on. So we're gonna pick port 1234. So now we're running over there, and then we can look at what the client does if we go to you're gonna use TCP here. So I'm gonna go to localhost 1234. So we can see that we got a connection over on this side here. And now when we type stuff in, we see that it was received, and we see that it gets bounced back to us. All right, so this is all running without ZD, just to kind of show the baseline of what we expect to see happening once we start running this over ZD.
And so if I can, you said it's not running over ZD, which means this has just stood up a local listener in the upper right-hand corner. You started a local listener on port 1234. And you just connected on port 1234 down below.
Yep.
Okay.
And so now we're gonna. That's just to kind of show the basics of how it works, and then we're gonna start introducing ZD into the picture. So for all this, since we're focusing on the server side, we're not going to worry about different variations on the client side for now. So we're just going to use our SDK embedded Zcat, and always use that as a client. So we only have to set that up once. So the demo also has setup things for various scenarios that we want to walk through. So we're going to use this client setup. So we can see what this did. So first, make sure we're logged in, cleans up anything from previous runs. And so here we're going to create an identity for our service, Zcat. We're going to give it a couple of attributes, so echo and echo client, and we're going to spit out the JWT for it, and then we're going to go ahead and roll it right away.
You are moving at lightning speed right now. So I think we need to take a moment and pause. So you have run a ZD CLI command, which has been baked in this has this demo subcommand baked into it, which is dripping wet stuff, not documented
Yeah.
anywhere. You can just you're just showing things that are like very far in the future kind of stuff. Maybe it'll be in the next release, but just as an FYI, it's this is the first time I'm even seeing this particular stuff. So brand new.
It was written yesterday and today, so it's as new as it
written
can be.
yesterday and today.
I finished it
So
about 15 minutes ago.
okay, so then the demo is connecting to the controller. That's what 3.1 is there. It's then deleting deleting identities zcat. That's something I haven't seen before.
That just lets you do multiple, right? So if you had a bunch that you wanted to delete at once, you list them all out and it would do them all instead of having to do one at a time.
I've never seen identities as a subcommand to ZD Edge delete yet. So is that anything that starts with zcat?
No, so it just means that like if
Oh, you can
right,
supply a tuple.
Right. Yeah. So
Oh, okay.
later we're going to be adding hosting identities, and so we're going to want to when we do our cleanup, we're going to want to clean up multiple. So instead of doing delete identity 1,
Gotcha.
delete identity 2, just
Yep.
list them all out.
Gotcha. And then you're cleaning up any old identities that might be there named zcat, and then you're making deleting the service policy called echo dial, which presumably is going to authorize the zcat identity to dial the echo service.
Yep.
And then you ZD Edge create identity service. I've never seen the service syntax either.
Oh, that's so when you create an identity, you have to tell it what kind of identity it is. And
sure, yeah.
In general,
user and device is all I've ever seen. I've never seen service.
Yeah, so service is just usually if you're running an application, then usually you would call that a service.
Okay, that's good to know. I've actually never done that. That's pretty neat. I'm going to use that now myself. And we're creating an identity that is named zcat, which is going to be a service. I can see those things. And then we're going to give it some attributes, the echo and the echo client. And attributes are, not an advanced feature of ZD, but if you've never used them before, just a way of grouping identities. And then the output is the JWT. Okay, that makes sense. And then I see that it enrolled that zcat as well. And then the minus RM I've never seen before either.
I added that yesterday. That just cleans up the JSON. Cleans up the JSON. So it's not. I always have them lying around when I'm doing my testing. And I was finally got sick of it. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna add a flag to clean it up. If you successfully enroll, it will remove the JWT.
Yeah, in fact, it almost should be just the way we do it, because once you've successfully enrolled, that JWT is totally worthless. But
right,
cool.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, we could make it the default. I didn't want to make a sort of change like that without talking to people about it first, but I figured as an option, it was a good idea.
All right, and then ZD Edge create service policy. Now we're making that service policy that's granting any identity which has an attribute of echo. Any service that has the attribute of echo to the identities with echo client as an attribute. So that'll let that echo client that we created like 4 lines above there, the service zcat, be able to dial the echo services. All right. Whew.
Right.
That was that was lightning speed, Paul. All right.
I'm going to go basically at speed, and I'm relying on you to slow me down.
Don't you worry, because I didn't follow that, and I work here. All right.
And just to clarify a couple things here. So the reason we're using hashtag echo to do it by attribute instead of saying we want to use the echo service directly is because we haven't created the echo service yet. So we can't reference it directly. So we're going to just use attributes to make that a little easier so that we can.
Well, see, I thought you were going to go a different place there, because the next thing that makes perfect sense is we're going to make 2 of them. And when you make 2 of them, using that attribute will be really useful, because any endpoint or any services that have the attributes will just match. And I'm sure that will come back into play later.
Yeah, we're actually, so in this scenario, set of scenarios, we're only going to create one service. we're just going to be we're going to be hosting this service in a whole bunch of different ways. But yeah, you could certainly, if you had a group of things that you wanted to all assign in the same way, then you could use a tag for that and group them that way. But in this case, it's just because I haven't created the service yet, so I want to be able to create this echo dial policy once, and then not have to worry about it as I change all the other configuration for each different scenario.
Gotcha.
All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is hosting things via the SDK, because that's kind of the simplest way to do things a lot of times, at least from a configuration perspective. So we're going to set up the server side here, and we're going to do a similar thing here. So we're going to do the single SDK hosted scenario. And would it help, actually, I set this up so you can do them interactively. So should you want to do this in interactive mode, so we kind of do it step by step, or should I run it through and then we can look at it after, kind of step by step afterwards?
Well, let's just see where it goes. Let you do what you're going to do, and then if I get confused and need to slow you down, then I'll slow you down.
Okay, so we're going to do this, and then we'll just scroll back up. So these all kind of do the same thing at the beginning, which is making sure that you're connected to the controller so that you can make changes. And then they generally clean up what they do, so that if you run this multiple times, it doesn't fail, right? So this is just going to clean up the service and the configs and anything that's out there, so that we have a kind of a clean working slate. So now the first thing we're going to do is create the service. So we're giving it that echo attribute, so that the dialing or so that Zcat will be able to dial it, because it can dial anything that's got the echo attribute. We're going to create a identity to host the service, so echo host 1, and we again give it the echo so that it can. This is sort of a general echo thing for like edge router policies, and then there's echo host. So it, for binding policies, we're going to be able to tie that in when we're setting permissions to who can host it. And then we do the same thing with spitting out the JWT and enrolling ourselves. So here we're giving the echo host 1 permissions to host the service. So we're creating a bind policy, which bind means you're allowed to host it. Again, the service role, here we're using @echo, because instead of #echo, I probably should have changed that to make that consistent, but since the service is already created, we can use @echo here instead of #echo. And then our identity roles is going to be anyone who's got echo host, which right now is just echo host 1. And then we're just going to make sure that we can actually access things via the edge router. So we're going to create a policy so that all the echo identities can use all the edge routers.
And all is a special attribute that just means literally any of whatever the thing is. In this case, edge routers. All of the edge routers are available to identities with the echo attribute.
It's a magic word.
It is magic.
It is so far, at least it's the only kind of magic word. All there is #all. Everything else is needs to be provided explicitly.
And it's only with policies so far, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
And then we also create a service edge router policy, so that the service specifically is allowed to use these edge routers. So again, the echo service gets to use all the edge routers. So now we've only got one edge router. So now that service is allowed to use the edge router. The identity is allowed to use that edge router. So everybody should be able to connect at this point. So now we can run our. Let's see what first. Let's see what it looks like if it fails, right? So let's go ahead and call our Zcat. Demo Zcat, and we now have a identity. So we have our Zcat JSON, and we want to dial the echo service. So it failed, said it couldn't dial it, and it said it doesn't have any terminators.
And if I can, ZD::echo, that is something that you have invented specifically for the demo.
Right. So yeah. So just to kind of match it with, previously we were dialing TCP : localhouse. So this is just a way to specify which.
Yeah, I'm just like, that is not normal vernacular. Like, generally speaking, this is a purpose-built Zetified application that Paul has written using our SDKs, and he has written it in a way that takes that parameter and knows what ZD colon echo does. It is totally specific to this particular application. That's all.
Right.
It's not
Another way
like
to
it
do it
could
would
be.
have. Yeah. Another way
We
to do
don't
it would
have
have been
a. We
to.
don't. I'm sorry. I'm going to just say one more thing. We don't have ZD colon in any of our config files anywhere. So this is just for this app. And now I'll shut up.
Yeah. No, I didn't. Maybe in for future runs of this, it might be better to change this to have like a dash like con type or something like that of ZD, and then have a service of echo. That would probably be a little clearer.
Yeah, but that's okay. I just right that's and that's what you'll see a lot of times if you look at the Zedifications, like a ZSSH, for example, will do something along those lines. So yeah, and also we're not exactly the most consistent when it comes to what flag to pass. Like, you're using -i. -i is one of those ones that gets abused by everything. Like, as SSH has a minus, or ZSSH uses like -c or something like that. But
Yeah,
it's always like
convenient to know
config versus
exactly what it
identity,
is.
right?
yeah.
So I wanted to kind of talk about this error message of service has no terminators. So if we look at our terminator list, we don't have any. So it's clear that we don't have any terminators. So what is a terminator? A terminator tells the ZD fabric how to complete a service connection, right? So if you've defined a service and you've defined ways to access that service, that's great. You can get into the ZD network and you can get permission to that service, but this ZD still needs to know how to actually reach that server in the end, right? Whether it's a non-Zedified thing that needs to be able to reach out to, or whether it's a SDK embedded server application that knows how to reach into the ZD network and make itself known. Somehow we've got to be able to route traffic there, right? And so far we don't have anything that will let us route traffic to the Echo service.
We haven't defined anything, right? Like, this is not a ZD thing. This is a using ZD thing, right? What I mean is, this is not a shortcoming of ZD. It is a simply we haven't defined it yet thing.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Gotcha.
So what we're going to do is we're going to start up the Echo server again, and this time we're going to give it a configuration, a ZD identity to host with. So we're going to give it Echo host 1. And so now we're hosting this application with that ZD application. And so now, ooh, that's ugly. Let me expand this out a bit. There we go.
That's so much better. Thank you.
Yeah. So now we have a terminator. So this application reached out to an edge router and made a connection to it and said, I want to host this service. And we checked to make sure that it had permissions via the service policies to host the service. And when we saw that it did, it created this terminator to show how to route back to that connection.
Now,
so
I've got to be honest, because I fully expected you to start a ZD Edge tunnel as opposed to going right to the full Monty of Edge embedded app or zero trust embedded application embedded zero trust. So you have written an application using our Go SDK that is now hosting this service, which means that if you were to do a netstat or look at the ports open, the Echo server up there would have no listening ports, right? It's totally
correct.
dark.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So just for anybody watching, that's really cool because that service is 100% dark. But I thought you were going to start that in the same mode that you had before, and then start a tunneler and basically show the same sort of thing happening, which you could have done, right?
Well, that's our next step, right?
Oh, you're going to.
I,
We're
I
gonna
don't
we're gonna
even
do
think it
that too.
goes.
Yeah.
Oh,
I don't
okay,
even
cool.
think it doesn't even go far enough to call it a dark service now that I think about it, or dark server, because it's really an overlay server. It's not even on any network at all. It doesn't have any listener on any network.
Yeah, I've started to use the terminology listening on the ZD overlay for that, because
Right.
that's exactly what it's doing. It's listening on the overlay. Yeah. All right, Paul.
Right.
Cool.
And
Well,
the reason
I'll let
the
you.
reason I wanted go ahead.
No, I'll let you keep going.
Okay, so the reason I wanted to show this first is because from a configuration perspective, it's the simplest thing you can do, right?
Ah, I
We
see.
didn't have to configure anything about the service really, although we had to configure access to the service, which I think is a good thing to have to do. You should have to say who can dial this service and who can host this service. But other than that, we had to get an identity for this thing so that it was in the permission model and we could give it access. But other than that, we didn't really have to do anything with the service. All we did was create the service, and now we're hosting it, and now we can use our Zcat client again. And now we're connected, and we can say hello, and we get a hello back.
Cool.
While we're in here, I want to also just talk a little bit about the Terminator stuff a little bit more. Let me bump this side up a little bit too. Okay, so we're currently connected here, right? We have an open connection. We can continue to type and get things across. And that is window line. Here we go. That is reflected in that our cost has gone up. So as more open circuits or more open connections are on a given terminator, it kind of keeps track of that, and the cost goes up. And that gets important when we get to the point of having multiple terminators on a service, multiple ways to get to a service, because we want to kind of load balance if possible. So we kind of track what's being used, and then we can route with that information. So we can say, oh, this thing has got a cost of this because there's X number of connections on it. This other one has less than that, so we'll put this new one on this other one so that we put it where there's less current usage.
And so presumably that means that there are some sorts of policies that one could apply to these costs. They're used somewhere in the future.
So that's an area that we still need to do some work on. We're being able to kind of define policies. You can, there is a Plugable Framework where you can inject your own routing code or selection strategies, where you can say, here's the set of paths that are available to me. I want to pick this one, and where you can also do your own costing. And
do we have any that are already built in?
So we've got 3 built in currently. One which always just uses the lowest cost, and then there's one that will just randomly pick, because sometimes random is the best, even though it's
even though it doesn't seem like it.
Yeah. And then there's also a random weighted, where it will also do random, but it will first look at the weights, and if one costs twice as much as the other one, then the random allocation will assign it randomly twice as often that one. So it's still random, but with some weights thrown in there.
And do the weights right now take into total bytes being transferred?
Currently, they only take into account just how many connections there are. So
gotcha.
That's
not activity.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So in a sense, activity is also taken into account, in that when we do routing, the terminator cost is part of the cost calculation, but another part is the latency of the path that you're doing, right? So if you have a bunch of traffic going over from one router to another router, we constantly are measuring what the latency is over that link. And if we have a bunch of traffic, presumably the latency is going to start to go up a bit, right? And if it's being overloaded anyway. And when that happens, that latency cost is also included in the cost calculations. So that will try to take that into account.
Does that show up here as dynamic cost, or does it show up anywhere?
It'll show up in the links cost. But right now we don't have any links. We only have one router, right?
Gotcha.
So if there's nothing to make a
Okay.
link to.
Cool. Well, I'll stop bugging you. This is how we do it, right? And if there's something interesting that pops up, we're just going to ask. So
I have a
thanks.
quick
Oh,
bug,
perfect.
Oh,
if you don't
oh,
mind, Paul.
Ken's got one.
Yeah. I mean, just zooming out real quick, it sounds like I'm trying to map this onto what I've encountered in the past with respect to load balancing algorithms. There are all these different ways that network routers have of, like reverse proxies have, of deciding how to balance the traffic. And if you have like a really powerful, capable compute instance in the pool, then you want to give it more traffic, that sort of thing. So this is actually able to do more because it has more rich information about those capacities. And that's what I'm seeing with it's not so much of an algorithm, like a simple algorithm like round robin or spreading the traffic based on some other criteria, but it's much more enriched by the latency information and with this consolidated in this cost metric.
Right, and you can kind of inject your own information into there. Like if you do have a router that you has more compute available to it, or one that is maybe expensive, then you can also set costs on routers, which also gets included in the path calculation costs. So if you've got one that is better versus another one, then you can cost the one that's not as good up. Or if you've got one that only should be used in cases of emergency, you can cost that one way up so that it'll only get used if the other one either goes down, or the
Right.
costs reach the point where it's kind of hitting parity with the other one.
Considerations that are out of band or outside the purview of the logic here, like it would never know unless you told it that a particular circuit or particular path is expensive, like in dollars.
Cellular.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. All right, let me check my notes real quick just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so yeah, now this is kind of the simplest case. So let's take a look at a slightly more complicated case, still with a single router and a single server application, but doing it with tunneler hosting now. So for all these tunneler examples, we're going to be using the tunneler that's embedded into the router. So we're going to set that up with, let's see, I'm going to do cd demo setup. For the Echo service, we're going to do single router host tunneler. So a whole bunch of stuff just went by. Let's take a look. So again, authenticating, doing all the clamp we need to do. And now we're going to create a config, right? So with SDK hosted, the service doesn't need any extra information to know what to do, right? Because the SDK hosting application connects into the overlay. And so we know where the path is, right? We have a connection to the path to that application already. If we want to reach out to an application, we need to obviously tell it where to reach out to. So we do that with configs. So we create a config called Echo Host here, and we tell it we want a terminator that is going to go to localhost port 1234 with a TCP protocol. So now when we create the service, we include that as a config option here. So this config here is going to get tied to this service here. You can use the same config for multiple services. This just means that this service will be linked to this config, but it's not exclusive, right? You can have multiple configs on a service. Configs can be used by multiple services. So now we're also going to make sure that our edge router is tunneler enabled. So we're going to call that out. And we're also going to make sure that the associated identity has the Echo host role attribute, right? So when you make a edge router tunneler enabled, and you want to host things on that router, we need an identity to act as a proxy for that router in policies, right? We can't put a router into a service policy, so we can't give that router permissions to dial or bind that service. So what we do is when you mark an edge router as tunneler enabled, it automatically creates an edge router or a matching identity for that edge router that we can then use in policy. So if we take a look at
because
our
the
identities,
policy that you wanted to write has a type of role that is an identity role, but a router is not an identity.
Right. Yeah. So we can see that this edge router 1 identity was created with type of router, so that you can kind of distinguish between those and non-router identities. So now that we have that all mapped, we can give it, do the same thing. These permissions don't really change. We're just changing who's going to have this tag of echo host. So we create our bind policy so that the router can host it, and create our edge router and service edge router policies. So now, if all has gone well, if we list terminators, we should see a terminator now. But before, the binding was edge, which meant that it was SDK hosted. Now the binding is tunnel, which means that it is hosted by specifically a tunneler that is embedded in the edge router. If we had an externally running tunneler, then that's just another SDK application that would look just like the Echo Server client looked, or Echo Server host looked, in terms of the way that the terminator looks. So now we're going to start up. Well, actually, let's try this again. Let's call our zcat, because we don't have anything running yet, right? So when we now see the error, error creating routes, dial TCP, connection refused. So that's because it's not running. So we'll start this back up on that same port, and now everything's back up and running again. And we see the same thing with the costs. Although what might be interesting here is the cost has jumped up to 80, and that's because we tried to use that service, or you try to use that terminator, and the dial failed. And when the dial fails, we bump up the cost on it.
How much does it get bumped up when your dial fails?
I think it gets bumped up by 20 at a time, and since we retry a few times, it'll get bumped up. It might get bumped up a few times as we're doing it.
And did it go down to 0 when you turned it off? Is that why it's at 80 and not 82? Because you don't have a connection anymore.
Well,
you do have a connection.
Yeah, we do have a connection. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so now whenever you have a successful connection, the cost gets dropped, and the cost also, I think, the cost also gets dropped sort of gradually over time, so that it has a chance to retry, to see if we can, if things come back up again. We're going to look at this is sort of a crude way for handling, is an external service up or down, and we'll see a better way of how to do this further down. Okay, so let me see. Take a look at my. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at removing our first single point of failure, right? So right now we've got 2 single points of failure. We've got our edge router, so we only have one of those hosting this, or using to host the service, and we only have one application. So let's fix the edge router first, and we're going to add another edge router. So I'm bump this up. So we're going to create edge router number 2. And we're going to update this edge router. And we're going to make it tunneler enabled. And we're going to add an attribute of a demo. And that's because some of these scripts are looking for the demo attribute, so that we, if we're doing things with them, we want to make sure we're not, if somebody were to run this on a system they shouldn't be running it on, hopefully that will prevent them from doing anything unforgivable. All right, and now we should be able to spin this up. Okay, so let's go back to our SDK example.
I can't help but notice a couple errors right out of the bat there, Paul. Can you talk about those errors? They show up so brightly in that red.
So this one is because I have my scripts that kind of generate new config or customized config so I can start a whole bunch of edge routers, but I've done that incompletely, and the health check port isn't unique. So when I start up my second one, it tries to bind on the same port that my first one is already using, and it fails.
Right.
And these. I'm not sure what that's. Oh, that's the link setup. So.
Oh, I gotcha.
So when we spin up another edge router and it connects, then we want to create links between all our existing edge routers. And in this case, these both have listeners, so they're both going to try to connect to each other. But we don't need two connectors; we only need one. So one of those will succeed, the other one will fail. And this happens to be the one that failed.
And it's one for each of the routers that are connecting. So router 1 tried to connect to router 2, router 2 tried to connect to router 1, and they both are going to have problems, right? Like depending on which one wins. Is that what I'm seeing?
Yeah, I think this one just happens to be kind of a duplicate error. I think we spit this one out
twice.
Actually, well, no, actually we got
two ports. Here. Yeah, it's two different ports.
Yeah.
It might have retried it and then decided that it's not the one for you. Yeah. All right, cool. Didn't mean to derail you, but when I see stuff like that, I always want to understand it before the demo guy just glosses right over it.
So we're gonna go back to our initial setup here. So we're gonna do setup with the single SDK hosted. So we're still this hasn't changed at all. So we're still doing exactly the same setup that we did before. We just have another edge router running now.
Can you list edge routers?
That's a good idea. Okay, so there are two edge routers, edge router 1, edge router 2.
Yep, they both have a demo attribute and they're both online. Cool.
Yep. And so now we're going to spin up our SDK embedded Echo server. And now when we list terminators, oh, you know what? I'm not sure. I deleted the config. Let's see.
Looks like some service policy might be hanging out.
Yeah, I think it's that. So if I didn't remove permissions for the tunneler to host it, make sure that was okay. Let's see, it's on edge router 1.
Might have found a bug.
Yeah, that might be a bug.
Well, sometimes deleting, I've seen in the past when removing a config is not sufficient to trigger a service update. So what if you remove the service too? Because you only deleted the configs there.
Yeah. I think it tried to delete the config. C74W.
Oh yeah, error while removing terminator. I saw it there.
I wonder if
error while removing tunnel terminator.
It looks like something might have gotten out of sync there.
Reboot.
We'll just
We'll just sweep that right under the rug.
We will file that for further investigation.
Nice.
All right. So now we've got our two terminators. So I think the interesting thing to note here, other than the bug, is that we didn't have to change anything on the SDK side. So the SDK is configured to, by default, try to create connections with up to 3 edge routers if they're available to host itself. You can tweak that configuration to make it 1 or 10 or whatever you want to make it, but by default it will be 3. So when another edge router became available, the SDK client just took advantage of it. So now we have 2 terminators, and if we run our Zcat client here, let's run it here, and if we run it again, let's see if I have a demo Zcat. So we can see, oops. Oh, I was trying to list the terminators and I tried to delete it again. Terminators. So we can see that they're both on the same terminator. And when I ran this earlier, it confused me. I was like, oh, there must be a bug. It's not load balancing them across the terminators. But what can happen is if the client and the host are both on the same router, in which case they are, right? Because they're both, there's terminators for the service on both edge routers. So whichever one the client connects to will have a bit of an edge because it doesn't have to cross a link to get there, right? It's got a direct connection on that same edge router from that client to that server. So that gives it an edge in cost because it doesn't have to cross the link. So you'll tend to see more connections if you're going basically on a single router. You'll see more that edge router be preferred because it doesn't have to go anywhere else, which I think makes sense.
Neat.
All right. Let's see. Okay, yeah, and I wanted to also show what it looks like if we were to remove one of these. So we can, still connect. Things still work. If we look at the terminators, they don't go away, and that's because the controller doesn't know if a terminator is valid or not on a given edge router, right? That it may just be that the connection has gone down, but the things are still connected to that edge router. So it'll wait till it comes back online to see if that terminator on that router that's down is actually still valid or not. So we're gonna now reconnect this, and it might take a little while. So now we're down to 1. It reconnected, and immediately said, "Are these terminators valid?" And one of them wasn't because that SDK got disconnected. But now the SDK has, it will retry on an interval with and when it sees that there's more edge routers available again, it will reconnect to them again, and now we've got our 2 back.
Hey, Paul, operational question for you.
Sure.
So I'm an application, and I'm using this HA configuration, and one of the paths goes away. Do I notice that? Do I notice a delay, or is the TCP abstracted away so much by this that I get a slow response rather than a reset or a fin?
So yeah, the way are you talking about, like if you have an existing connection over a terminator that goes away?
Right. If I've got a TCP stream from my application to between 2 peers on the overlay, at the application layer. They're writing on a TCP stream, and something happens in the middle, and an HA relevant event occurs where now my traffic actually going over a different path. Do I
So
need to
yeah,
do I need to handle that as an application, or is that actually handled by the fabric?
there's two different scenarios there. One is, let's say you've got a path that's got router to router to router. If that middle router goes down and there's another router available that we can go over instead, then your traffic will get seamlessly rerouted. If if the router that you're connected to send traffic in, or if the router that the server is connected to send traffic into the overlay goes down, then your specific connection will get disrupted and you'll have to reestablish. It should, if there's alternate paths, if there's multiple ways to get to the service, then the next connect should work immediately. There shouldn't be any time, but right now we can't handle initiating or terminating routers being taken down because there's there's a specific connection there, right? And that's something that we're looking at addressing in upcoming releases, but that's sort of longer term.
Still super resilient. I mean, that would be a heck of a promise to make to the application, that you'll have a seamless transition, across things like circuit failures. That would be unbelievable, really. But still much more
we're not too far from it, really. We just have to implement that. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, we can handle. If there's a router in the middle that goes down, we definitely can route around that. It's just right now at the edges, that the routing doesn't handle that as gracefully, for sure. Okay, so I think the next step was to actually bring up another. Oh no, we were going to do the same thing, but with the tunneler now. So let's take a look. I think.
Just from a quick time check perspective, Paul, we are 8 minutes from the top of the hour. Not that we can't go long, but I think attendance starts to wane around the top of the hour. But I would love to have a session 2 on all of this, perhaps next week. So is it okay if we just go directly to starting 2 applications and load balancing them? That's really one of the things I wanted to see myself. Like, as I write an SDK app here, you know what? I'm going to do this too. Boom, and then boom. As I write SDK apps for myself, I often will listen and bind the identity that is listening. So I really want to know, how can I have an HA application embedded server? And that's what you've already kind of gotten as a demo here, right?
When you say, are you talking about addressability, or are you talking about just HA, or the combination of the two?
Well, see, there's perhaps my ignorance. What I am saying is, oftentimes when you do you have some simple bind code that's out there that you can show us, like the demo, how it does the bind, just where just so we can see what a listen with options looks like. I'm just wondering if you have that available.
Let me let's see. I'm sharing that screen, so I got to go over here and.
Yeah, show us some code. Right. So listen with options. I see the default listen with options. I will oftentimes set the identity. So you have bind using edge identity right there. And that is set probably to true. I don't know itself that bind with identity is, but
it's just a kind of configuration flag, right? So in most cases, you're going to set that default. It depends on what kind of service you're hosting, right?
Ken is asking if you can make that bigger. I don't know if you can. Like, you have to have that. It's a pain in the butt in GoLand. So that's all right. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's legible to me for what it's worth. But anyway, I will often bind with identity so that I can address that terminator. But I was wondering, if I bind with an identity and I set it to true, do I have to use the same identity? Can I use two different identities? Or is that really a single identity that's binding? Is there no HA if I use a quote unquote addressable terminator?
So you've got a wide range of options there. So I think maybe we should clarify the context first. So like, what does it mean to bind with identity, and what is it like? What does it mean to associate an identity with
Sure. With a service, with a
service? Yeah.
an
So
application.
maybe, yeah. So I'm just gonna since you already have the SDK side set up, I'm just going to run the multi SDK hosted, so we have a couple of identities to work with here. And now we're going to run two of these servers. Echo host 2 now. So now if you look at this, we now have 4 terminators. And so there's two from this one and 2 from this one. And they act as a unified whole. In other words, here we've got a service that we can scale out horizontally. We don't care which one we go to. Those things like web services or things like that, where we have either stateless or the service doesn't really care, right? About context, and you don't care which server you're getting to. You just want some work done. Doesn't care where it gets dispatched to. So, when you do a request here, if we call our Zcat client, it's going to end up somewhere. So in this case, it ended up here, and we have that load balancing that works there. And now we have redundancy both at the edge router layer and at the application layer. But this doesn't work for every kind of application, right? If say you're hosting a bunch, you have like classic examples like SSH, right? So you want to be able to have access to a whole bunch of different SSH servers, and maybe you want to have that under a single service of SSH. But obviously, you care which one you get to, right? You don't want to get a random SSH service. You have to have some way to say, I want to get to this particular thing that's hosting the service.
Right.
Yeah. And so you can do that with.
So if I can recap, then over here on the right, you have 2 different applications of the same kind of application.
Yeah.
And they both have their own discrete identity, as you can see by the 2 Echo Host 1 and 2 JSONs. Okay, and so those both come online and are binding a service, right? They are not binding as an identity.
Well, you're always binding a service, but it's a question of whether you're binding it as a member of a larger group or as a more specific identity.
And so if you are a specific identity, then HA is available through edge routers, but not the discrete service which you are addressing.
Right. So because in that case, you can do that, right? You can have 2 different applications both present the same identity, and you have kind of groups of identities hosted that way, but there's not a lot of use cases for that. Usually if you want to get to a specific thing, that specific thing is a specific thing, right? You can't have 2 SSH servers that are both the same SSH service, right?
Yeah. So what I'm learning today is addressable terminators are really meant for a single entity.
Yeah.
Full stop.
So things like
period.
SSH or VoIP, right? VoIP's also a great use case where you have a whole bunch of different things hosting the VoIP service, and each one is somebody that you can call.
So if you want high available service, you don't want to do the service itself. You want multiple identities to be able to service that service, so to speak. Then you don't bind with addressable. I get it now. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So if we pass in the addressable flag and now list terminators, we see that these now have specific identities. And now when you try to Zcat like this, it's going to fail because by default, when you dial, it's going to use the blank identity, and there are nobody bound to the blank identity. So you have to tell it which one you want. just because, if you wanted to say dial a VoIP service, you wouldn't want to be able to dial kind of random, right? You would want to force it to pick which VoIP identity you want or which SSH service you want. So again, this again is sort of specific to this application, but you can say, I want to get to the Echo host 1.
Yeah, cool.
And now we see it come up here. If we were to do Echo host 2,
yep,
we see it come up down here.
Yeah, neat. Cool. Well, I think this is a good place where I'm going to say let's roll right at the top of the hour. We've only scratched the surface. I know there's probably a whole bunch more that you had to show. Do you want to come back and show more next week? Would that work?
Yeah, I think so. We can. We still have to cover how to do addressable terminators in the tunneler, and how to do things. I want to talk about health checks, right?
So we're talking about a whole month of ZDTVs here.
Well, I think probably another session will cover. We had to cover a lot of basics in this one, right? Talking about terminators and how those things all kind of fit together. So I think we can kind of get off the ground a little bit faster next time.
Well, that's cool. I mean, this was really neat for me. I think it's super neat functionality in general. Thanks for coming on and showing us. And it sounds like you're signing up for next week, which is cool. So anybody who's watching and's gotten this far and can come back next week, then come back next week and we'll finish this sucker off.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Ken, for hanging out and asking questions and monitoring chat. We'll see everybody next time.
Later on, Paul.